Let's talk just a little bit about HACCP. We've got a HACCP class, so I'm just going to cover enough HACCP to give you the basics that are usually on either the exams or on even in the military. Those that take tests, like the Navy, these are the questions, usually the HACCP principles, that are on on their advancement exams. So I'm just going to cover the very basics. So what is hazard analysis critical control points? HACCP. So first of all, you got to say the word properly. HACCP, not HACCP. And looking at the words, analyzing the hazards. So you're figuring out what are the hazards in chicken, steak, lettuce, whatever. Skipping the critical word. What are the points, the control points, the points at which you could fix those hazards? And then once you figured out all the places you could fix those hazards, going back and saying, okay, where is it critical to get the dirt out of the lettuce, to kill the bacteria in poultry? So that's what hazard analysis critical control points is all about, HACCP. It's taking food from the whole flow, from the farmer through the distributor, through your kitchen, to determine where might problems happen and where is it that you can fix them. So it's a program designed to ensure safe food as food flows through the operation. What HACCP does is it lessens the risk of foodborne illness. In other words, it doesn't stop if you do have a HACCP plan in place, you'll never have a foodborne illness. What it does is it lessens the risk of a foodborne illness. There are 7 principles or steps in HACCP. And principle 1 or step 1 is performing the hazard analysis. The HACCP team identifies the hazards associated with each food ingredient, dirt, bacteria, chemicals, toxins, by checking a reference source would be like the local health department regulation or the Army or the Navy food safety regulation. And from their experience, so one of my buddies had the experience on a loading dock, a dog peed on the box of lettuce. Okay, let's add that to the list. While the food is on the loading dock, we want to make sure that dogs or birds or whatever can't get to it and pee or poop on it. Once we've identified the hazards in principle 1 or step 1, step 2 is to figure out, well, where do I fix those hazards? That's called the critical control points. Just think of the English control point. What's a control point? A place where you fix something. Driving into a military base, how do they control who gets in there? At the gate, they have a control point. Same thing. What's the critical control point? That means you could check 5 miles away, 2 miles away, 1 mile away from the base, but the best place would be right at the base at the gate, right? So that would be your critical control point. A CCP, or critical control point, is the point that may result, if you don't check the food properly, in an unacceptable health risk, where stuff happens. A step in the process where the hazards must be either prevented, meaning they never happened, eliminated, meaning you grew too many bacteria but you cooked to 165 and got rid of them, or you at least reduced them to an acceptable level. You're not serving sterile food, but you got few enough bacteria in there, or little enough dirt, that it's not going to be a problem. Examples would be in the oven, so that would be a critical control point, would be the oven, where you're going to cook the meatloaf to 155, right, to kill the bacteria. Or veg prep, where you're going to wash the lettuce to get rid of dirt. So for the hazard of bacteria, the oven would be a critical control point. For the hazard of dirt, veg prep would be the critical control point. So we figured out what the hazard was. Then in step 2, we figured out where is it the best place to fix that hazard. And then step 3 is, what's the critical limit? What says that if we do this, then we don't have that problem anymore? Think of speed limit. What's the speed limit sign say? 65. So they've determined that 66 starts to cause problems, and you could have a wreck. 64 is good, 65 is good, 66 is not good. That's your critical limit, in that case called speed limit. So what HACCP does is it establishes standards at the critical control points, and those are called critical limits. So for example, 165 for chicken in the oven. If we cook the chicken to 165, we've determined that the chicken won't have too many bacteria in there to make us sick. No dirt in the lettuce would be the standard for lettuce. How much dirt would we like to have? Less than a cup, less than a teaspoon? We'd like to have no dirt in the lettuce. So that would be our standard or critical limit. pH of 4.2 for the salsa to eliminate bacteria or reduce to an acceptable level. Wash your hands after going to the bathroom would be the critical limit for, let's say, if you're doing in veg prep, you're preparing the foods, the salads. One of the critical limits would be that you have washed your hands prior to doing that. I tend to repeat myself a lot because my students forget a lot. So, what do we do first? First step was we did the hazard analysis, figured out what are the hazards in the product. Second, we figured out what's the critical control point, where is the best place to fix that hazard. Step 3 was we set a critical limit. How do we know if we fix the hazard? We establish a critical limit and see if we hit that. How do we know if we hit it? We monitor. So we set up a system to check or monitor the critical limits that you set at the critical control points. That means if the temperature, the critical limit was 165, then you monitor that by taking the temperature. If the critical limit was 165 for 15 seconds, you monitor that by checking the time. Maybe the critical limit is you're not allowed to leave the food in the danger zone for more than 4 hours. Check the time. Maybe the critical limit is the fish doesn't smell. How do you monitor that? You smell the fish. So we monitored the critical limit and we found out, oop, we didn't hit it. So how do you fix the food if you didn't hit the critical limit? You establish corrective actions to fix the problem and to hit the critical limit. So what specific action do you take if the item is supposed to be 165 degrees in the oven, but it's found to be 158? In that case, you would just leave it in the oven longer. What action do you take if the critical limit is no dirt in the lettuce and you find dirt in the lettuce when you monitor it? You take the lettuce back and you clean it again. So what do you do if you didn't hit the critical limit? It's supposed to have 4.2 pH for the salsa, and you don't. What do? You add some lemon juice or whatever is appropriate for the salsa. 1 did the hazard analysis, 2 did the critical control points, 3 did the critical limits, 4 did the monitoring, 5 did the corrective action, 6 is the verification. Did we do all that? How do we know? If we took the temperatures 4 times an hour on a serving line like we were supposed to, the HACCP team does a verification, which is those activities other than the monitoring that determine that the HACCP plan is being followed, that you did what the HACCP plan said to do. So monitoring is taking the temperature. Verification is they took the temperatures. How do you know that? You check the log. So if the HACCP plan says to take the serving line temperatures every 30 minutes, you know that by checking the log. How else could you know it? You just see that they recorded some temperatures in the log 5 minutes ago, 2 minutes ago. Take the temperatures. The HACCP team would double check, take the temperatures and see if in fact they match what the people wrote down. How do you know if they check at receiving and refuse product that didn't hit the right temperature? Check the receiving log. That's called verification, checking on the people to see that they did whatever you told them to do. An example of verification: when checking on refrigerator temperatures after checking the log, find the refrigerator calibration log to make sure that that was done. Thus, they met the critical limits. In other words, critical limit would be refrigerator has to be 41 or below, or 0 or below. But how do you know that was accurate? So you're also, another And the seventh principle is record keeping in the court of law. They don't care what you say you do. Unless you wrote it down, you didn't do it. So record keeping is a big thing in HACCP. The record should be reviewed. Doesn't do any good if you don't look at them. Why do you have all these logs? You should look at them periodically. The value of a log is to look at them over the course of the last month, and you get some trends. How come every time Fred has the supervisory duty, nothing ever happens, or every time Fred has the duty, something does happen? Well, maybe Fred's more honest than the others, or maybe Fred's messed up. Deviation should trigger additional reviews. In other words, if as you're reviewing the record keeping, you see that the temperature logs on the serving line are consistently low, that should trigger you to go back and, a week later you talk to everybody, you do a little training, and then you go back a few days later and see if they have fixed that problem. You should retain your records for a minimum of 1 year beyond the shelf life of the products. Records provide documentation that appropriate corrective actions were taken when critical limits were not met at the critical control points. So you're documenting that if you didn't hit the critical limit, so the food was not at the proper temperature on the serving line, you took it back and you reheated it and put it back online, you're recording all of that. In the event your establishment is implicated in foodborne illness, documentation of activities related to monitoring, corrective actions, and calibration can provide proof that reasonable care was exercised in the operation of the establishment. Somebody might get sick. They call down and say, hey, I got sick yesterday. You can say, well, what time did you eat here? 5 o'clock? Okay, at 5:05 we pulled food off the serving line that was too cold, way too cold. Okay, well, they might have a point. Somebody else calls later, they talk to that person, and they say, yeah, I got sick too. What time did you eat? Oh, it's about 5:20. Well, at 5:15 we put fresh product. Allergens are huge these days. There's actually a great organization online that does a lot of work on food allergies. A lot of chefs that I know are on that site regularly because, in our lawsuit happy environment, if you feed somebody some foods that people are typically allergic to and you didn't let them know it was in there, then you're going to be liable. So common allergies are egg products, milk products, peanuts, fish and shellfish, soy products, wheat proteins. Probably the highest incidence are the ones with the asterisks, milk, peanuts, fish, and shellfish. So if it's obvious that they're in there, then the customer is required to let you know that they're allergic to peanuts. So if the customer knows they're allergic to peanuts and orders the peanut butter pie, that's their problem. But if you put some MSG in a product and you don't let the people know, and the people are allergic, the customer's allergic to MSG, that's when you're in trouble. As a server, you should alert your guests if the allergen is not obvious. For example, if, let's say for scrambled eggs, chef can put some milk in there. Probably not a problem because they cooked it, but could be a problem. And so for someone who's allergic to milk, you need to let people know that the chef uses milk in the various product, that type of thing. Utensils that we use for these items should be cleaned before being used for other food items. So let's say you have on your dessert menu you have sundaes. Well, I order a sundae with peanuts on top. Next person orders with the sprinkles on top, and you scoop the sprinkles up with the same utensil spoon that you just served up the nuts, and there's a little bit of essence of nut on there, and I could die, and you'd be in big trouble. Artificial ingredients, like MSG type of thing, cause a lot of the allergies.